So here we have one type of lid, right? You see that? This has a gallery in there. You see that? And then it has a gallery so that when you make your lid, this lid, right, seats in there like that. You guys see that? And it seats in there, and that keeps it from just falling off. And then here's another one where it seats into that gallery. You guys see that? It seats into there. If you try to have a lid, let's say, oh, here's one with a flange. Let's go to this one. This is the way it looks before it's made. And then after you trim it, this is lid, right? So this has no gallery. You see that's just a straight up cylinder. And then this lid has a flange, right, that drops in there, right? So you see that you don't need a gallery or a flange. Like someone usually have a gallery or a flange, but not both. And then this is another lid. This is another type of lid that we're going to make today. Is that one, it seats in there. You guys see that? Now, if you don't have a flange or a gallery, right? This has no flange or gallery. This has no flange or gallery, right? When you put your lid on, that works, right? Gravity holds it together, but the minute you like pick it up and try to walk around with it, that lid just slides off, right? Because it has nothing to hold it in place. Where this flange here, right, if you tip it a little bit, it stays locked in. Same thing with this gallery, right, it stays in there, right? You can tip it around. Here's a different shape, right? This is more like a teapot-y shape, right? And then you can have your lid with a flange fit in there still, right? Isn't that cute? Or you can have this guy fit in there still. Although I never make this sort of round belly shape with this kind of lid because it looks kind of awkward. Right, that interface just doesn't look. I mean, there's ways that you can make it look good, like you could seat it down, but I didn't want to cut out multiple examples. But you see how that lid just looks really good form-wise with this pot, right? But this sort of flat lid looks okay on there. It just kind of fits that squared up theme kind of look. But this one still also looks good, right, on there. So any questions about these pieces? Right, and how they fit together. So these are examples of the basic kinds of lids that are out there, right? Let me take this away, and then let's show you let's show you just the kinds of lids. So here is this one in reality, right? So you can see that's the lid, right? Fits in there. So this is the kind of one of the kind of lids that we'll make right now today. Start. And then this is just like, what is this for? Like, this is basically a cup. I didn't put a handle on there, but I'd normally put a handle. It'd be like, well, just keep your stuff warm, right? It's kind of cute, fun, right? And then here, you could also make this other kind of lid, right, with this flange, right? And this is a teapot one, right? Does that make sense? So that, and it just has a flange that reaches down into the space, keeps it from falling off. This is one that's a little bit bigger, so it has a knob. Right, but you see how it has the same kind of deal going on and drops down on there like that. Beautiful, beautiful. Right, let's set that one aside. And then here you could also do it like this, where you have like these giant like soup bowl kind of things. And bum, 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 right? You see it's the same lid as that. It's just a wider thing. So we're just showing you a couple different applications, right? Now, for something this wide, I probably wouldn't make this kind of size lid. Normally, this type of lid is for very small diameter things because it's really flat, right, across. So flat objects have a tendency to sag in the kiln, where this one, since it's domed, since it's domed upward, it doesn't sag. It's a little bit stronger in the kiln, so it doesn't sag down, and then it seats into these types of bowls really nicely. All right, so let's. Yes, it does matter which one you make first. You always make the harder one first. So let's talk about that. What does that mean? So in the end, right, I'll have these two things, right? If I look at this and I look at this, which one has more clay, which one's harder? This one, right? This one is really flat, is less clay, so I make this second, right? So this is the bowl, this is the lid. Now, there are times when you would want to do it kind of opposite. Let's say if it was a butter dish, the butter dish, this would be the bottom, right? This would be the thing that goes on top, right? And then whoop, there's my stick of butter inside. You would definitely throw what we would call the lid first because it's bigger. And then we throw the dish butter part after. That makes sense. So you see how this could just be a flat piece of clay with a little flange. So you've seen those dishes, right? So your butter would stick in there, and then that's your lid, and you're like, woohoo, right? All right, good question. always throw the harder thing or the thing with more clay first, because it's much harder to throw the second thing because you have to fit it to the first one. That makes sense? Very good question. So here, let's start. So since I'm going to throw a cup-like form, I'm going to do this guy. I'm going to throw this part first. This guy first. So I just need some clay here. Let's pull out some clay. So I was going to give you a choice, actually. Do you want to see... No, actually, I'm going to throw this kind. I was going to give you a choice of a bowl or a cup, but since I'm going to do 2 lids, I'll do both lids. I'll show you... I'm just going to do a cup version. So there's enough for a cup. Oh, the other thing I've done is I've taken my ball of clay and I wedged it into one bigger ball of clay. So here, I've taken this whole ball and I've wedged it all together. So why is that important? Well, you want to make your lid and your pot out of the same piece of clay so that they dry and shrink about the same amount. That makes sense, because if you make one out of a wet piece of clay and you make it the other part out of a drier piece of clay, the wet one will shrink more and it won't fit later. So I always take enough clay to make at least one body and one lid, and I wedge it all together into one ball, and then I chunk it off. At least I'll have one chunk for the body, one chunk for the lid. That makes sense? So this will be my body part. I need a little bit more, I think, to make the cup form there. So this is going to be a bigger cup. And so why am I making a bigger cup? Well, that's so that it's easier for you guys to see what I'm doing. Okay. So here we go. Flap it down. Center it up. All right, so we'll go fast through this part. So it's a smaller piece of clay, so I can throw this with a little bit higher speed, right? I don't have to go slow for this, right? So a lot of times we in especially beginning class, are always worried about wheel speed. We can go as fast as we want for this sort of smaller piece of clay. So this is a little bit bigger than what I normally would do. So down, let's raise this up a little. So now it's ready for opening. Well, I'm going to color it in just a little bit. I'm going to push this down. So I can already tell it's right. I should have maybe weighed it out. So I already wedged this piece of clay. Right, and I'm going to pull straight back. There we go. So let's measure the thickness. I should have measured the thickness earlier. Didn't bother. So it's a little bit thicker than I want, just a smidge. And then I'm going to come back through and like do a little bit of compression here. Make sure this bottom is nice and flat. So all of these things, since I'm going to go through all the trouble of making a lid, right? If I screw this one up, if I don't do this all correctly, I just scrap it, because I don't want to go through all the trouble of making a lid and then this crack or there's some major fault. Because I still got a lot of work to do, right? I consider making lids like it's more than double the amount of work, right? And if I screw this bottom up, and if this bottom isn't good, there's no use for me to waste my time making the lid part, right? So if I'm throwing along and I just feel it, like there's something really wrong with this, I just don't bother making it into the body. That makes sense for everybody? Because there's no use for me to go through all the work to make the lid, and then just to have this crack or warp or something. So here we go, going up, like that. And then let's look inside to see. There was an air bubble, but I think it popped. There was an air bubble there. Let me see if I can find my needle tool. Clear off some of this stuff here. There's an air pocket right there. Let's pop it. All right, and then let's go again. All right, so I think it's a little bit too short still for it to be a oh, I'm dripping on my computer. For it to be a cup. So we're gonna raise it up just a little bit more. It's just too squatty for me. So I'm weighting it down good. Gonna push in a little bit and go up. So it's looking better. Ooh, that looks really good. All right, so that looks about right. So I think, though, it's a little bit thick down here still, so I'm going to do one more raise going up there. And it's going to be a big cup, right? It's going to be pretty big. There we go. So I'm really looking at the proportion, right? That I want it to be proportionately tallness to width. That's what I'm really looking for. And it's going to be a very simple thing where it's just going to be there's no shape or form to it. It's just going to be a straight cylinder. All right, so now we're going to smooth out the inside and outside. Oh, I got to clean up the water on the bottom. So there's tons of water in there, and I take care of that first. Right, mop all that up. Spend some time and looking at it, looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do here is I'll use these two ribs, right? We've done this before. Inside, outside, parallel each other like this and go up with a little bit of pressure. Flip this one around. So I'm taking my time, making sure everything's round and everything. So that's like the next really important thing is you always want to make sure that this top is round, not oval. Okay, if it's ovalized, then you'll never really get your round lid to fit, right? So I'm just trying to make it the best cylinder that I can. Now, you can always put a shape to it. You can always put some form to it, which I could. Do we want to make it into a form? Let's just make it into a form. So normally I would leave it as a cylinder, but let's push it out a little and see what we end up with. Right, so I'm going to let it go diverge from cup, right? It's going to become something else. So I'm going to take this part of my thing and just push it out a little. So in the end, this is not going to be a cup anymore. Well, it still could be a cup, I guess, with some belly. Right, you see that? So I'm just going to experiment with pushing it out just a little bit. Right, because that's just how it felt to me. Like it felt like it wanted to be something else. So I'm kind of letting it be that thing, right? So I'm using my rib here and pushing it outward, right? While it's spinning. So, and I can do this because the cylinder still has some strength left to it, right? And so now it has like that. So now it'll still work with a lid still. So the other thing is, so this top needs to be round and this needs to be flat on top, meaning it can't be going up and down, up and down, up and down. So sometimes, so I would probably leave this, but I'm going to cut it off just to show you that it's part of this process is we cut that off. And then since that is now dry, I'm going to wet it down using my sponge here. Right. And then I'm going to use this guy to do that. Yeah. Round that baby off really good. So you see how nice and beautiful and happy that is, because it still has to be a mug. And because I'm going to go through all the trouble of the lid, I'm trying to make sure it's the best. And so I dripped a lot of water on the inside. I want to mop that up. You guys see that water in there? When I was doing the chamois. So I will go back in there and clean that up. There. And then I'm going to come back through here and undercut it down here. Now, I don't want to be too aggressive, because if you undercut it too aggressively, you can knock this out around. Right? So I'm going to take it easy. Now, I guess I would normally be really aggressive, but maybe you guys shouldn't be. It all depends, right, on how bold you want to be, right? But you see how careful I was when I made the undercut, right? I went down really gentle. And I want to scrape that off. Super careful, super careful, super careful. You have any questions, just jump right in. Right, so you see my whole goal is to make sure that this rim stays dead round, like nobody's business. If I can keep it dead round, the lid is really easy to keep round because of the way how we make it. And so I can get like a perfect fit. Like you can get an airtight fit if you're really good. So that cup is done. All I have to do is undercut it. Now, I do not ever lift these off the wheel. I just leave these off the bat. I just leave these on the bat because the lifting process can put a slight ovalization into the lid, right? That makes sense. So that is that. Before I lift it off, I will always measure the lid. So we have a couple different versions of these calipers, right? So first of all, let's just go with this one. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these calipers and separate them and measure the inside distance. Let's go that one. So, let's go that one. So you can see that I'm measuring the inside distance there. You guys see that? So I'm measuring just the void. So that's touching this wall here and then that wall there, barely, right? I do not want to mark it though if I can, right? You see that, how it just fits inside there? So the beauty thing about these calipers is they're set so the opposite side, boop, oh, I just knocked it. So the opposite side will flip around and should be exactly the same on the other side, except it's measuring the other way. You see that? So we'll use these first. I'm going to set these aside. Now, I always put this guy, so I'm going to re-round, spend some time re-rounding that because I hit it with the calipers. All right, so now when I set this aside, I always keep it nearby. I don't put it away. I want to keep it really close. So that's very important for me, and I think that's a big mistake that a lot of potters do, is they will take this thing away and like put it really far away. I'm going to have it really close. So I'm going to set it right here, right next to me on my bench. So let's show you where that is. So if we turn, right, you see how it's right there, right next to me. Ideally, I would put it right in front of me, right up here somewhere, but I don't really have the space. So ideally, it would be right there. So I can put it on a stool right there. So that I'm putting a stool there so you guys can see that it's always in my vision, because I'm a little bit like out of sight, out of mind kind of guy, right? Because you're making lids to fit this guy. So now it's going over there right next to me. So I can always see it, right? It's always in my field of view. And then we'll come back to this. So now we'll make, let's make this lid first, right? This kind of lid first. So this kind of lid is made upside down like this, facing. So this will be the wheel head and it's facing upward that way. And then we flip it over and we trim it to that. So you guys see how those two pieces look. So I even drew a line there showing the parts where we trim off, and then we get that there, okay? When we make this, right, so we've taken my cylinder and I measured this inside distance from there to there, right? And then that's what I need to measure. My critical measurement on this is from there to there. And I want this distance here to match up with that distance there so that they fit perfectly. You also notice that you see how this guy here is going inward a little bit, going inward a little bit. You see that, those two? The flange is narrowing. So when I throw it, I want the flange to narrow this way. That's so that when you're putting it on, it can hit, you can put it on, start with a little bit off center, and then when it drops in, it kind of centers itself up automatically, right? If you have the flange going straight up and down and you make a really tight fit, it may take a while for you to get it on there exactly right. But if you turn these inward a little bit, right, it'll come down easy every single time. And then the part that fits, the critical part that fits is right here where they touch. All right, let's make this. So new bats, and once again, I always make these on bats. And then I just need a lot less clay. Now this, so I'm using a chunk off the same piece of clay. I'm just kind of eyeballing what I have there. I'm just kind of best guessing what I think is enough. I think I'm gonna need a little bit more. When I'm making a lot of these, I know exactly the size that I want, but I started with a slightly bigger piece of clay and all that. So this, to me, it's always better to start with more clay than what you think you need, right? Because at the end, I can trim the excess part off. So that goes in the middle. So these little pieces of clay, you really just gotta floor it, right? I'm just floorboarding it here for speed-wise. I'm just going as fast as I can. So up we go, blah, 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 up we go. So you see how it centers really fast. So these ones you can just kind of muscle in to center a little bit. You can just bear down, fast wheel speed, and you know, kind of self-centers a little bit. All right, so now I'm gonna moosh it down. So as I'm mooshing down, remember we did plates, I'm gonna mash it down. I'm gonna put side pressure here on the side so that it doesn't mushroom over and trap a bead of clay. I want this to get wider, but I don't want the top part or anywhere up here to mushroom out and then touch the bat first, right? And trap an air or wet clay. I want you to push it down and then put side pressure so that it keeps just sliding out. So I think that's so There we go. Let's just measure. So now I have this measurement still, right? So I can just quickly check to see if I'm getting there. So you see how I'm not quite wide enough yet. Because how do I know I'm not quite wide enough? I need space for this flange to be wider than the pot, right? And you see that I'm not quite there yet. There's not enough overhang here yet for that. So I'm going to push this out just a little bit more. So it makes me a little nervous because I maybe actually didn't start with enough clay. So here we go. We'll try again. Okay. Oh, that's plenty. You see that? So I'll have enough for this overhang, and then my flange will come up right there. Okay. So now you're probably wondering what's going on because I have no clay for my flange, right? So what I'm going to do is when I go down here and go down and thin that spot out. Let's do that one. When I thin that spot out, I'm going to start pulling back here. So if we look at this guy here, I want to go down a little bit, but I do not have to trim anything right here, right? Really, I don't have to put a foot anything. I'm just going to trim that curve in. So I can go down right there, and then I pull back. And as I'm pulling back, I'll rise up a little bit to leave more clay behind so that when I trim it, I have my trim version. I have enough clay to trim this roundness here. You guys see that? And if you want it flat, you just pull back flat too. Does that make sense? So, but I like this round dominess on there. So here I'm pulling back a little bit, and then I'm going to check the depth here. Stab, check. So you see that? That's enough. So that's thinner than what I normally would do. But I'm not needing to trim a foot or leave any clay behind. So I'm not going to trim that any thinner there anyway. So I don't need to trim a foot. That is fine. And then I'll pull straight back really for a little bit. Even though I know I want a curve in the end, I pull straight back. So why is that? If you look, I keep putting that too far away. Where did I put it? So if you look here, right, the very start is almost flat. You see that? Even though it has a continuous curve, it's basically flat. So I just pull straight back, and then later I start rising up to create this curve. So now I'll start rising up, and then you see that this starting to create this little like wave of bead of clay coming up. That's going to be my flange clay, right? And it naturally starts to form because of the way how you're pulling back. That clay naturally starts to well up and form the flange, right? So, and then I will just keep pulling back, and then I'm rising up, rising up, rising up. Now, the thing I got to watch out for is sometimes the flange wants to rip off because it's now starting to wave up and come up onto this wet surface here, right? And sometimes they'll separate and come off, and that would be bad. So sometimes I need to take my sponge here while spinning around and what I call marry it down. So I'm just going to push it, marry it back down to this clay here so it doesn't come off, because it will do that sometimes. It will come off in your hand. So here, then I keep pulling back, keep pulling back, keep pulling back, keep pulling back, keep pulling back. And then I got to start worrying about where that flange needs to be. Okay. So I'm going to measure again, right, with this and just bring it down, right? So I'm going to measure. So you see, I got a little bit more room there. You see that? Woohoo! But not that much. So it's best if you can catch it the first time right away, but sometimes I don't. So let's pull back a little bit more. I'm smoothing this part out first because it's a little bit like I see some line marks in there. Yeah, see I'm taking my time to really smooth that out. Now I'll come back in here and start pulling back just a little bit more, right? Let's see if that's enough. Right? Oh, look at that. So that's actually perfect, right? I can almost stop there. But what I'm going to do is purposely go too far to show you what to do, right? Because I could stop there and just finish it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it too far to show you how to readjust it back. So here, I'm just going to purposely go too far now. You see that? So now when I check it, it's going to be too big, right? So, oh no, you see how it's much too big. You see that? I don't know if you guys could see it really good, but it's at least this thickness of this flange too wide. So I have a problem here, right? I got to push this back in. Well, now I know that it's wide enough, so I'm going to spend some time cleaning up this inside to make it beautiful, because when people pull this lid off, they're going to see this inside, right? They're going to take a really good look at how good you are, right? Everyone's going to look, right? Because it's one thing, they're going to pull the lid off and look, because that's the first thing they're going to interact with, right? A bowl, you pick it up and you're eating out of the inside, but when you're done, you flip it over, you look at it. That's like a half an hour later or whatever. This, when to interact with this jar, the first thing you do is you'll look at the outside and then grab it, and you're going to look at the lid and the inside, right? So I want to make sure this part looks really good, because you don't want people, you don't want to be ashamed, right? So there, and so now I fix that. So now this is still too wide. I haven't fixed this part, and it's too wide by a lot, right? So let me get the right kind of rib. So in general, I don't like these ribs very much, but these ribs with these square wooden corners are really perfect for this. I almost never use these for anything else. That square corner, really important. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push this square corner right into that corner right there and just push it back in, right? So here we go. I'm going to push that corner in, and then this part and this part, both this part and this part are both touching this clay and that clay. So I'm creating a really crisp corner, inside corner right there. And then you see how that, you saw how that flange rose up a little bit, and I actually kind of need that. So usually when I make these, I make this too wide and I push it back in a little bit, and you saw how it kicks that flange up. I count on that, because you saw how wimpy that flange was a second ago, and me doing that really helps out, right? See how much more robust and happy that flange is. And then we come back and we check with this. Oh, still a little bit too wide. Oh no. Luckily, John showed me how to fix that, right? So I push that back a little bit more, right? And then now that flange is even looking better, more comfortable based upon size. And you can see that I've already started to kick that flange in. So how am I doing that? When I'm doing this, I flex this part inward a little bit, right? So make sure that flange starts going, because at some point it's going to look good. And at one point when I measure, it's going to be right there, and I want to be done. I don't want to have to then push this inward. So if I get it, if it was good now, I would say, good, I'm done, right? But it's not quite there yet, so I'll keep using this tool to keep flexing it inward. And you see, this is a little bit tricky. It's hard to see what I'm doing, because I'm not just holding it. Let's see if top down will catch it. Oh, wrong one. Let's see. So I'm not just holding it straight like that. You see that? Because if I hold it straight, just that corner, I won't get that kick in. What I'm doing to make sure I get that kick in is I'm tilting it a little bit this way. It's hard to see, but I'm kicking it in this way. So definitely see how that corner is way out that way. This part is kicking back this way. This part is kicking back that way. So it's not straight up and down, like, because if it was straight up and down, you wouldn't be able to see it in the top down camera. But I'm turning it this way so that it's like this corner is pointing in the direction of the wheel. That makes this thing and makes this thing, that makes that tilted inward. That makes sense. So if I tilt it like this, let me see if we can show you here. So here it's just straight up and down, right? But if I tilt it like this, you see how that angle kicks toward the center of the wheel. That's what I'm doing. And I can still leave this fairly flat. And so here we'll do it this way. Push, 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 push. There, let's measure again. So I did a little bit more pushing. Let's see. Oh, we are so close. Oh, we are basically there. I'm going to do a little bit more. There's something very strange going on down here, which I don't know what it is. I'm getting a weird line there. All right. So that's looking really good. So that fits. Woo. So now the last thing, one of the last things I do is I always come back and recheck to make sure this is still matches my original, because I could have dropped this or knocked this. So I always come back and check to make sure, okay, so it still fits. So I know that that measurement is good. So now I don't have to monkey around with this anymore. I'm just going to clean up the tops and edges of this. So here, because hopefully I don't have to mess with this top of this flange anymore, but I haven't finished it. It's kind of sharp sometimes, so I'm just going to take a little bit of time and just round that flange off. Just makes it look a little bit cleaner, better, whatever, right? And this is a little bit disconcerting is, what do I do with that rib? Set it down somewhere. I don't know what happened to that rib. You guys see that wooden rib? Where did I put it? Did I drop it? All right, so we're just going to use this one. So we can use anything, right? So I'm going to use this one for a second here. Kind of moosh it in because there's a little bit of roughness out here at the base, which I don't feel happy about. So you see, this is the part that sits on the jar. This is the part, the flange that goes inside the jar. This is the thickness here that I'm going to undercut this a little bit because that's just a little bit of stuff I don't have. And I'm not going to undercut it at all. I'm just going to take a little bit. I don't really have that much there to take off, right? Now, if you want a pot that has a higher dome, right, that has this where this dome is higher, right? You see that where this sits higher, like has a higher arc? You need to have it thicker here, right? And that means I need to start with more clay. So this is a very shallow dome, very flat. But if you want a really high arcing dome or a higher arcing dome, this needs to be thicker when you get out here. As I'm pulling back, I'll rise faster. That makes sense? So I would have needed to start with way more clay if I want a higher dome. You could dome this baby as high as you want, right? But after a while, it kind of makes more sense to kind of make more like a bowl shape or something. But you see that I could double this size. If this was double this thickness, I could have a double the height of the dome, right? And you need to think about all that while you're making. All right, so this one gets undercut. This one gets wired. And once again, I leave it because trying to move these flat, like plate-like things is really hard. And so that one's done. I'm going to put this one far away because I don't want to knock it by accident. All right, so next one is, we already did that. Oh, next one is this. Next one is that one. And this is made completely different. And we make this with the knob already on. So this one is made, if this is the wheel, gets made this way with knob up. Right, and so we'll show you that, how we make that here. So if you want to look at it. Yeah. So I like these because they're really simple to make. And they're pretty fast. And I kind of like the idea of making a knob. And what's good about them is you saw the way they seat. They actually seat, the lid is actually seating inside the pot. So it has a lower center of gravity. So one of my old teachers used to say he liked making these kind of lids for teapots because they don't tip out as fast because they're actually kind of, the center of gravity is actually can be inside the pot, right? So they tip out later as you're tipping them out. I'll add a little bit more clay than that. There. All right. That seems like too much clay, but once again, I'd rather have too much clay than not enough clay, right? All right, here we go. Ooh, I felt this piece of clay sliding around a little. So really fast again, super fast speed for this. Any questions so far? Now, I don't expect you to make two different styles of lid for each pot, right? I'm just showing you two different lids so that you can pick which one you want to make. When I was doing this, I went crazy, right? When I was a ceramic student, I was getting really into it, right? So I'd rather do clay things than do anything else when I was in like my third class. So I made everything, right? So my teacher would show me two different kinds of lids. I'd try each one like 6 times, right? I'd be all over the place. All right, so critical part of this is, right? We need that, and we need my cylinder, right? So this part right here, see way down by the wheel head, will be this part right here. You guys see that? When we make this lid, this width right here is this width right here, right there. Because we make this pot sitting that way on the wheel head. Okay, so I want to measure this width and this width, measure this width and make sure that it's going to fit or be close to fitting inside my pot. You guys see that? So that's my first thing. So luckily, that's what my calipers are still set for. You guys see that? So then let's take a look and see how close we are. So we have a little bit of space. You see that? So, and then you see how I made this. It's kind of straight up and down because I wanted a good opportunity to measure. So this is very straight sided. So that allows you guys to see how far off I am really easy. All right, so then that means I need to squash this down a little. So I'm just gonna push down this way and let it expand out a little there, and make sure it's round still. And also, always when I make this, anytime when I make, so that's about right. You see that? It's kind of slipping down. So there's parts of this that it's touching right here, but it's close enough. So now we're gonna get ready to open up and do all the business stuff. So here, I'm gonna leave a bead of center part of clay. That's gonna be my knob. So instead of opening going down the middle, I'm gonna open right here a little bit off center, okay? So this is gonna, so this part, and so this is the theory, right? This part down here is actually gonna be the part that fits inside of here, right? And then I'm gonna throw a little thing up, fold it down, so that part will fold over and sit on the rim. That makes sense. So here we go. So I go down off center. So I still wet down and I go down off center. So see, I'm leaving clay behind, right? That's going to be my future knob right there. And I'll fix it up, make it look good. So I am cheating inward a little bit as I go down, but I can just not cheat inward. So how far do I go down? Let's just check my thickness, my needle tool. And there is a little bit of trimming I do on the bottom side, but not much. I just do trimming to clean it up. So I can go pretty thin. So now when I'm looking at this clay, I started with way too much clay. So I'm going to have a bunch of clay. I'm going to have to ditch some of this clay as I'm making, which is fine. Because, right, it's better to have too much clay than not enough clay. All right, so now that part is made. I'm going to throw this a little bit, or I'm just going to pull this out of the way a little bit. You see that? So it's already looking kind of lid-like, but I want to start making this before I get too far into this. Because when I make this part, it has to work, and I can't bump it later, right? Because if I bump it, it'll get out of round or something. So I just pull this out of the way. I'm going to do the knob now, and then do this part second. Because if I screw up the knob, bump the knob, it's not a big deal. I can attach a new knob later. I know how to do that. But I cannot remake this later if I screw it up. If I screw this part up later, there's no recovering. So I always make the knob first. And so what I'm doing here is this is just a solid blob of clay, like sticking up in space. You have to make the top of the knob first, the shape of it that you want. So let's go over a couple shapes. Like there's this kind of shape where it's hollow in the middle, right? And then I'll flare it out. And then I could grab it over the top like that, and it's flare. And then for what's good, that's just a fun kind of knob. And then for this sort of thing, you could put a big blob of glaze. You know, some of our glazes look awesome when they're too thick and they're running all over the place. You could really blob some glaze in here because it ain't going anywhere, right? It's stuck in here. So if you like that, and you know, you can have a very special occasion thing happening there. But I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to cut this off because I think I have plenty. So I'm cutting that off just to show you that that was a possibility, right? And I had way too much clay there to begin with. So I could have done that, but we're not going to. So you see how I'm just straightening this area out, and I'm going to push down a little bit more because I need more clay, right? So you see how I just pushed down a little deeper? So now I have more clay. I think that's just enough. So I'm going to start now cutting this inward. You see that? So I'm really starting to get that clay set aside now. You see that? So you see how this, I kind of gave myself a new knob, right? So here, now I can't thin this out. I have to finish the top of the knob first because once I start undercutting it, it gets too weak, right? I want a narrow piece of clay down there. It's like the shaft can take. So I want to finish the top of the knob first. So I just kind of want something kind of round. So you see I'm bending my fingers over. I'm kind of just giving it some time, making this kind of round shape at the top. You see that? Just spending some time rounding that shape off. Now I'm going to start, since I feel pretty comfortable with the top, I'm going to start getting my fingers underneath and just pushing inward, and then the knob will squirt up into the air, because we also need it to have it so you can kind of knuckle your fingers under there. If that knob is too shallow, right, you'll only be able to grab the top half of the knob and it'll be really slippery, right? You need to be able to, there to be enough space so you can get your knuckles and fingertips underneath of there. So I need to, now it's okay, so I'm going to floor it, and then I'm just going to start squeezing underneath here, and you see how the knob starts to rise up into the air. Now you have to do it in a way that doesn't cause too much stress to the clay. I almost ripped it off because I was being too excited, right? So, but you see, nobody knows, and then I'll come back on here and start cleaning it up, right? So you can see how there's plenty of room for me to get my fingers underneath. You see that? All right, so I still, let's say we're kind of done with the knob for now. Let's go back, and now I'm going to clean up this floor space. Now I have to deal with this, right? And I just want to make sure that I'm still about the right thickness, which my guess is we're a little bit tight right now. It's okay if it's a little bit tight, but what I'm going to do now, because this is too wide, is I'm going to push this back in just a little bit like that, and you see how it's squirted back up. And I'm going to check my thickness again. It's okay if it's a little bit, wow, it's about right. All right, so I might have just did a little bit too much. I want to pull back just a little bit to give myself a little bit of thickness there. And then I'm going to push this in down here and then start throwing this out. You see that, how that's starting to work? I slowly release. And so this is going to be way too much, but that's what we want. We want this part to be too much, because what happens when we're making this kind of shape, these flared out shapes, this never ends up round, right? When you're doing bowls and you're flaring out a lot. So we want this way bigger or bigger, and then we'll trim it back to round later. So you see how, and then I'm starting to push it down. You see how I'm flexing it downward? Like that. And now I'm cleaning up. Now, I can do anything I want here, but in general, for me, I like this really sharp corner there, but you may want to keep it softer, a softer corner, but I'm going to put in a really sharper corner. And once again, you still need enough room that you can get your fingers inside and underneath the knob. Right, so I'm going to push this down some. And you see how that's folding? If you can see here, that's like folding down. That's okay, because I don't need any of this part anyways, right? I'm okay with that. And there is a lot of strength out here, so I'm not too worried. So let's just trim some of this off. Let me clean up in here before we get, so I'm getting closer and closer to the end, right? So now I'm really going to spend some time and really clean up all these different spots, right? And I'm okay with this knob. I left the knob a little bit like that because I thought maybe I could undercut it some more if I have to get it squirted. But this is ended up being really low, so I don't have to, right? I got plenty of room. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the outside of this, and I'll explain in a minute. Because there. So I just measured the, I guess I better do that on camera. So I just measured the outside of this. Oop, I squeezed it too much. Oop, I squeezed it too much. So I'm measuring the outside diameter of this. You see that? Because I need this to be wider than that, because when this drops down onto there, for me, I want the outside to match up, the outside of my lid to match up with that. And that's just a me thing. You can have it overhang if you want to. I just like having it super clean and line up with the outside. Where's the top to that? Oh, yeah, here. So when I do this, right, you see how that lid lines up like that, and it's just a thing, right? But it could sit and hang over the outside or anything you want. But to me, I want it like that, I guess. I don't know why I do that. All right. So that's my thing, right? So you see how I got plenty of extra space. I could use this line to mark it. So there. So what I'm going to always do is I cut it actually bigger than what I think I need. So where's my needle tool? So I know that it's right about there. So I'm going to cut it off wider than that, because what I'm going to do is later I'm going to trim it so it fits perfectly. Right? So you see that? So it's wider, and then next time when we trim these, next class, I'll trim this so it fits like perfectly like that, because it's very difficult to make two things line up at the same time, because I need to make sure that this inside part fits this inside part, which is the thing I'm most concerned with, because that determines how loose it is, right? And then I want this outside part to line up with that. I'm not so concerned about that, because that's really easy to fix later on, okay? So now I'm basically done, and then I'm going to soften it up with my sponge, which is here. And I know that I'm going to have to trim off some of this anyways. So, but I'm just going to take some time and sponge it off just in case, right? You never know. It may turn out exactly right, but for me, I plan on doing a little bit of trimming here. And so I generally want this flat, so I'm going to spend some time flattening this out, taking this rib and just spend some time trying to make it. Ooh, that was it. Ooh, that felt really good. No, it's very weak, right? Because if you look at how little clay, there's probably about that much clay holding it on. That is wet clay, right? That was thrown. It's very unstable. So you notice that I've been avoiding that area. You can't bump into it at all. But if it does come off, all you have to do, you can just hand build one on there, right? And there's tons of different ways to do that. So, and you see how the knob is wobbling around? It is, but nobody knows, right? Later on, right? Nobody's ever going to know that it's wobbly. You and me only, right? So any questions about that? That's it. And then I undercut it a little, and then I wire it off, and everything lives together. The trick is, between now and next time, I want these to dry out about the same amount. Usually the lids dry faster because they're made of less clay. The pots dry slower because they're bigger hunks of clay, usually. Now, there's some other advantage, disadvantage, meaning that the one thing that slows this down is that proportionately there's a lot of bottom to this, but there's about the same amount of bottom to my pot too. So what usually happens is I'll leave them out for the rest of class today, and then I'll bag them up, and then tomorrow I'll unwrap them again, but whichever one is drier, I'll wrap up first and let the other one sit out for longer. But I want them exactly the same dryness when I trim them next class, if I can. Any questions? Woo.